Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We'll be starting in about 2 minutes. The panel is ready. We invite you to come and take your seats, please.
Ready? Good evening, everyone. We are so excited to see so many people here with energy late in the day to continue the dialogue on this really critical topic. I'd like to give you, on behalf of the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation in Agriculture, I'd like to give you a warm welcome to the home of Sustainable Agriculture of the Americas. This is a space that ICA facilitates with our partners for the agriculture sector of the Americas to not only present its advances, but also the challenges and priorities, and really try to reflect the realities of climate action and in the Americas. And we're really grateful to SNB, the Global Roundtable on Sustainable Beef, WWF, and ILRI CGIAR for organizing this event, the role of sustainable livestock management in restoring and improving grasslands. And again, are so pleased to have you all here.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you for the introduction. Okay, so thank you all for being here today. Welcome to today's panel. This is the last panel of the day, so I can imagine that you're quite tired. So thank you again for being here for this very interesting topic. So first, let me introduce myself. I'm Josefina Eisel. I'm the Regional Director for GRSB for Latin America. I'm based in Buenos Aires in Argentina, and I work with all the Latin American countries, and of course, with GRSB as an institution. So for those that don't know GRSB is a multi-stakeholder organization. It was founded about 10 years ago. We have our central office in Colorado Springs in the United States. We have more than 100 members. We have presence in 25 countries. We have 13 national roundtables. Each of the national roundtables, they work as a multi-stakeholder platform again, and they have also its own members. So in total, we have around 700 organizations and members that work towards more sustainable beef production and promotion of better practices on sustainable beef. So this is what we do. We have defined 10 years ago through the principle and criteria what sustainable beef is. So we are talking not only about environmental issues, as mainly that's what we usually discuss, but also about social issues, animal health and welfare, economic also impact of the production of beef, and technology. So we have different areas that we cover when we talk about sustainable beef, not only about climate or biodiversity, as we also talk about. So, but let's go to the topic of today. Today we are going to talk about the role of sustainable livestock management in restoring and improving grasslands. This is a joint event, so I would like to thank you, SNB. I would like to thank ILRI, CGIAR, and WWF. They just helped us to put this panel together, so thank you very much. This was done in collaboration with all of them. So today we are going to show some concrete examples on how sustainable livestock management can help to restore grasslands and all other native ecosystems, but mainly focus on grasslands and pastures. We will show how livestock can be a solution to climate change to reach the 1.5 degrees. So let me just go. So these are some facts. I'm going to give the role then to Siniro Costa to give some of the framework, but this is some of the facts of why we know this topic is so important. So as you all know, across the globe, the grasslands are under increased pressure. So we need to do something. There is pressure from increased population, also pressure from livestock, that there is just too much stock in a small area. So that's something that with sustainable management that can change. So grasslands are estimated to contain about 343 billion tons of carbon, nearly 50% more than forests. And that's something that we always, at least in Latin America, we talk a lot about forests, but not enough about grasslands. Sometimes they don't even have a framework or a legal framework to protect the grasslands. So they have a very important ecosystem that we need to talk more about. They also help to maintain and enhance this, maintaining and enhancing this requires adjustments of grazing pressure by optimizing the presence of livestock across landscape. So we are going to talk about how livestock is part of the solution. It's very important. I think I heard this a lot, but it's really part of the solution. If we do it sustainably, we can work on more sustainable livestock to regenerate soils, to regenerate landscape. So produce and conserve is possible. They can both work together, and the beef value chain is responsible for this transformation. So this is what we are going to talk today on this panel. So first, I would like to introduce Cyniro Costa. Cyniro Costa is from ILRI, from CGR, and CGIR. Sorry? CIAT, sorry, I had it as CGIR. From CIAT, so you can also explain also what's your role in the organization, and also we know that grasslands has been degraded. There is 1 billion hectares of grassland, of area that has been degraded. So can you please tell us a little bit about what's the role on sustainable livestock for this restoration?
Okay, thanks. Thanks everyone, thanks very much for having me here again. And it's a pleasure. And then I'm Cyniro Costa Jr., I'm a scientist with the Alliance of Biodiversity International in CIAT. IRI is a sister organization, and we have some colleagues from IRI in the audience. Good to see you all. And I would like to cover a few topics related to degradation and also the importance of livestock in these climate commitments and the restoration of these landscapes. Right? And I think first we need to understand what are the major causes of degradation. Right? And I see three main aspects that have been happening that help degradation. One is the lack of technical assistance. In many places we don't have technical assistance whatsoever. Access to farming inputs, or for example improved seeds or high quality fertilizers and this kind of farming inputs, and also finance to help farmers to make this transition and de-risk all the investments. And then these three kind of aspects only in Latin America have created more or less 200 million hectares of degraded pasturelands, and when you go globally you reach about 1 billion hectares, so it's quite significant, right? Only in Brazil, 100 million hectares of degraded pastureland, meaning that more than 50% of the pasture area in the country with some signs of degradation. So that's critical. And why is that? In some aspects, because farmers have no option, depending on where they are, and some understand it as a low-risk activity. And it is a low-risk activity because you do basically nothing. It's a low-profile production system, so that's low-risk. You don't produce much, but you also do not have much at stake. But there are two considerations here that can be, I would say, game-changing aspects when it comes to restoration. One is that we expect to increase livestock production by 25 to 40% by 2050. And that's a huge increase in meat and milk production. Huge. And if we are, that's the first aspect. And the second aspect is, if we are serious about climate targets, restoration will come along, because it will be necessary to work on these open and cleared areas, to these pasturelands, and work on pasture-based intensification at some point. And when we talk about pasture-based intensification, we are talking about again, improved seeds, rotational grazing, feed supplements, all these basic aspects that we've known for more than, I would say, 50 years, I would say so, but we do not apply. And that's what I think. Increase productivity or increased demand for livestock product plus seriousness in climate targets will drive restoration along. But one critical step for the risk in to farmers. That's what we have seen. And to give you an example again from Brazil, when we have been actually I am focusing my research lately is that to restore 1 hectare of degraded land and make it improved or productive again, it costs more or less $2,000. 2,000 in 1 hectare. So it's a lot of money. So if farmers, not all farmers will actually take this risk. Actually, only a few farmers will take this risk. And that's why I also think climate finance can play a critical role. And I've been saying that over the course of these days. If we look at the proportionality of climate finance directed to different food systems or emission sources, so to say, we see a huge disproportionality. Let's consider, again, food systems emit 30% of global emissions. Livestock, more or less 65% of food system emissions, meaning about 20% of global emissions, the whole value chain. Livestock is receiving less than 1% of climate finance globally. 0.57% according to a report released by the World Bank in 2021. So a sector that is linked to 20% of global emissions receiving less than 1% of the climate finance, I mean, if we work together collectively to streamline more climate finance, perhaps we can do a big push for pest restoration globally. And my final point here is, and we did some calculations to understand how climate finance can actually help restoring degraded lands, restoring pasture lands. And we came up with the number that for every dollar from climate finance, it can cover more or less 4% of the cost of the pasture restoration. So if we scale a bit, $10 coming from climate finance, we can cover almost 50% of the cost of pasture restoration. So it's pretty significant. And I think, again, collectively, we need to think through how to reach out and tap into this climate finance, or divert, let me put this way, climate finance into the livestock sector. So I stop there by now. Thanks again for having me here.
Thank you, Siniro. Thank you. Thank you, Siniro. I think it's very important what you said about climate finance, and also for all of us, all the organizations that we work, is how to get access to that, because I know there have been commitments, but it's not that easy to get access to that. Is it through the organizations that we work with, through the country, so I think it is very important that we stay tuned and understand after this COP all the different commitments that are made, how to access them and how to make sure that they are directed to livestock. So I think that's very important. So thank you, and then we will continue with the dialogue later. Okay, so now I would like to introduce Maria Elena Varas. She's from WWF. It's WWF, right? It's not the wrong organization again. From WWF, so she's responsible for livestock and food. So please, Maria Elena, welcome today. And then, yeah, I would like to ask about nature-based solutions. We know that grassland restoration is one of what is called a nature-based solution. So I would like we know they play a very important role on this commitment that we have made on the Paris Agreement to reaching the 1.5 goal. But also all the countries that have made commitments, these commitments are called also under the national determined contribution. So can you please tell us a little bit about the commitments and how these commitments from the countries can help also through restoration on this target that we have?
Thank you, Josefina. Pleasure to be here. First of all, it's important that it's countries and then all sorts of different stakeholders that are committing to taking action on biodiversity and addressing the climate crisis in land conversion. I think where we are right now is not just the what, but sort of the how of how do we get there. So what are the mechanisms that need to be in place? The financial ones you were mentioning, of course, key. And particularly when we're looking at grasslands and savannas and knowing that they cover 50% of the world, these are really, they offer a huge opportunity to bring solutions for nature and climate. However, these are landscapes that are often underlooked and they're not so much high in the agenda when we're having these type of global discussions. So I think this is an important piece that we need to be working on as we move forward. And it's sort of taken for granted at times. I think that there's a piece here when we look at grasslands and thinking about 60% of the food produced in these ecosystems, housing 25% of the population here, being an enormous source of freshwater resource for rivers and wetlands. These are really key ecosystems that we need to be protecting and working on. And I want to highlight two specific ways in which WWF is addressing this, although there are obviously many, many more. One of them is through an initiative that started several years ago, concluded in a coalition on grasslands and savannas that met at COP28. This is an initiative that we're calling the Global Grasslands and Savannas Initiative. WWF is part of it, UNCCD, UNEP, many other organizations, governments, etc. And what we're looking at is how can we, through this multi-stakeholder action, accelerate the goals to protect these ecosystems. Particularly looking at the role of livestock here. So what can we do to address the sustainable practices that need to be incorporated at the country level in order to achieve our nature and climate goals? I think there's a few pieces here that are important to do as we enter this type of work, and particularly looking at the next couple of years, and in 2026 that's been announced by the UN as the year of farmers, ranchers, pastoralists. I'm sure I got the name wrong, but it still provides us a milestone. And I think there's two things that we need to be doing at the same time. So one is addressing the current production systems that exist and accelerating action there. But while we're doing that, also setting the building blocks for what does the future of production for livestock mean in various different countries. I think here I want to go into a little bit of sort of like how do we then scale and accelerate and implement this type of work. This is getting into the second tool that I wanted to mention, which is the support that we need to have from countries is critical. And this is where NDCs come into play. And although NDCs in the majority of the countries do have some sort of reference to agri-food systems, there's a significant gap when we're talking about grasslands, savannas, and sustainable livestock. So what WWF has done here is it has addressed this gap, and we'll be releasing a toolkit for countries to support countries to accelerate the ambition in achieving the NDCs, and also supporting in terms of policy making and regulatory framework. One of those is specifically on livestock. There's another one on grasslands and savannas, and there's others that my colleagues will be presenting tomorrow. But this is key because it allows us, by highlighting these topics through NDCs, it puts the topic on the agenda, and with that, it's a better way to get attract investment and financing to advance this type of work. So I want to say, supporting countries from this perspective is something that will allow for a more comprehensive way of working with everyone across the value chain, but also with governments working along the NDCs, and that's something that we want to be working on specifically. And this includes policy making, this includes production, MRV, enabling governance, and specific sections that can be addressed by each country according to the priorities that each country has. This is not one size fits all, obviously. This is each country has their own specific priorities and it needs to be addressed from the bottoms up. Finally, I want to say that we are currently working on some landscapes on these topics in Northern Great Plains, in Colombia, Mongolia, Paraguay. But we're really excited that through this toolkit, starting 2024, we'll be able to work with many more countries and governments to advance this agenda and hopefully achieve the nature and climate goals that we have through sustainable livestock. Thanks.
Thank you, Maria Elena. Okay, well, thank you. I think it's very interesting. I was looking forward to hearing from that toolkit. I think it's, as you said, the importance of rolling out, starting with an example, but being able to roll out that good example to other countries, and there's no one size fit all. So maybe what work in that one country, you have to find another one with similar characteristics to make it work. So really looking forward to that. And really, yeah, and also to work more on policy making and also to work together with the private sector, because we know a lot of the investment also come from the private sector, and it's important they have a very important role to play on all these NDCs, etc. So thank you. So now I would like to pass to Bernard Kimoro. He's from the government of Kenya. He works on livestock and climate change. So thank you, Bernard, for being here today. And Kenya is now, we are moving to a different continent with very different characteristics, very different challenges, but also many opportunities. And grasslands and savanna is one of the main ecosystems that you have. So, but also you have a lot of smallholders, you have pastoralism, so I imagine the challenges in this area are very different. So can you please explain us a little bit about the work, the community work that you have in restoration also on different lands in Kenya? So.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be in this panel. I wanted to tell her that we are ready in terms of policy. We are just waiting for investment. So if you're looking for a place where you want to invest, Kenya is ready. Yeah, for Kenya, I think it's is maybe slightly different from South America, and specifically for issues around pastoralism. I always tell people, you know, Kenya is a livestock country. I said this yesterday. I'll keep saying it everywhere. We are over 80% is asal, which is basically grassland and savanna. 30% of our population lives in that particular area. 70% of our livestock are found in that region. And the people who live in that region, the asal, 90% of them depend on livestock. So if you look at, in terms of the land mass, we are looking at 48 million hectares being under arid and semi-arid land, yeah, out of about 60 million hectares, yeah, if you look at it. Out of the 48 million, which is the asal, about a half, which is 24 million hectares, is purely pastoralism. No crops will thrive there. The other half is agropastoral, yeah, so that is the context. So one thing I want to say that in Kenya, what we have done is we have tried to put in the policy framework. We have a strategy. It's called the Rangeland Pastoralism Management Strategy, which has looked at all these issues. And for us, the people who reside in those areas, the average livestock holding is not more than 20, yeah, livestock units. So it's quite small in terms of the holding. And so what we have attempted to do also is to ensure that, yeah, the climate change is causing a lot of vulnerability among the people. The risks are very high, so we are looking at how can we be able to invest in those particular areas through various ways. One is the government has put in projects. Currently, we are implementing a very important project, which is looking at some of the aspects that I've had here. It's called um, de-risking inclusive value enhancement project. It's called DRIVE in short, which is looking at bringing aspects like index-based livestock insurance, also bringing investment in terms of supporting the pastoralists in those areas in managing their ecosystem. They provide inputs like the seeds for the seeding of the rangeland. Yeah. What is happening with the climate change is that as the area is overgrazed, then you find that the seed is degraded, so we have to put in a new planting material in those particular areas. So one of the things that we're also looking at, I think Sinir also talked about it, is one of the challenges we are seeing is the fact that the seeds are not there, the inputs are not there, so we are providing that. Yeah. A concept which has gained traction, which is very critical to us, is what you're calling the participatory rangeland management. People often don't look at pastoralists as people who understand the ecosystem, but they are the people who really know how to manage. If you look at the Maasai, for example, yeah, other than the driver of the climate change, they really knew how they could manage that very fragile system. Yeah, pastoralism is about coping. Yeah, they had movement patterns, they had livestock corridors where they used to move, so they really knew. So through the pastoral participatory rangeland management, I think one thing that we're also doing is to ensure that the communities are involved in the management of those pastoral areas, looking at how can they be able to have livestock numbers that are according to the capacity of that area. Yeah. So the optimum stocking rates, for example, is one of the things that we're also looking at and addressing it critically. Finally, I wanted to say, in our NDC, the first NDC, before we raised our ambition, we only talked about investing in about 100,000 hectares out of the probably 24 million hectares for improving the pastoral area. We have just done our National Climate Change Action Plan, and for the rangeland, what we have done is to raise the ambition of looking at the area that we want to improve in terms of restoration. So we took about 5% of that area. So our ambition is, out of 48 million hectares, can we have about 1.2 million hectares for the first 5 years, that anybody who is coming to do investment there, then we are looking at restoring that within 5 years. The next 5 years, we do another 1.2 million hectares. We are lucky we have also VCM projects. Probably some of you have heard of the Northern Kenya Rangeland project, which is also through the conservancy approach, is bringing in the aspect of rangeland restoration, but also bring other benefits to the community. As people become vulnerable, they'll destroy the rangeland even more. Yeah, the trees which are there will be cut for charcoal and all those. So we are looking at other ways of bringing income into those areas, but not forgetting the aspects of participatory rangeland management in all this. We used to have community ranches. Those are also being revived. We are thinking of a new project that is going to look at the community ranching system, which was very effective, that can also help us restore further, so that by 2050, we look at 12 million hectares of our land being restored. Yeah.
Thank you, Bernard. It's always very interesting, at least from us, that I'm focused very much on Latin America to understand also how the pastoralism work, how these community projects that, as you said, also it's all about exchange also, and communities that also have experience from the past that it has been doing always like that. So how can we also learn also new techniques for improvement and restoring areas? So thank you, very interesting. So now I would like to pass to Marcos Pereda. Marcos Pereda is the president of Sociedad Rural Argentina. He's from my country, so I know better from that area. Thank you, Marcos, for being here. Vice president, sorry. So Marcos, well, in Argentina, we have a large area of grasslands or different pastures, also a lot of agriculture. It's a country that has been also producing food for many years since it was founded. But also the focus has been lately very much on deforestation, on forests, but maybe not as much as we need on grasslands and other pastures. So can you tell us a little bit about how is that seen from the farmer's perspective, from your organization perspective, the importance of converting and restoring the grasslands, and what are the opportunities there from the farmer's perspective?
Thank you, Aisel. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for having me. I should go back a little bit in order to understand what happened with the Pampa Húmeda. We call it Pampa Húmeda, the humid pampas. Before glyphosate and before no-till, we used to have rotations, crop rotations with pastures, usually alfalfa pastures. This was very productive land. We had a lot of, maybe really productive land all over province of Buenos Aires, southern Córdoba, southern Entre Ríos. Well, the whole Pampa Húmeda is enormous grassland. Usually it was very populated with cattle, but as the no-till frontier, crop frontier advanced, the cattle was only placed in the areas that were not arable. So the crop frontier went ahead, the alfalfas were reduced, and cattle remained where we could not have arable land. So this sent the cattle maybe north to the forest, a native forest, where we could have a mixed production, and also what we call the areas in the province of Buenos Aires that are less productive. Cannot be anything else, only for cattle. Usually now we can say then that we have 90% of no-till in the whole Argentina. And we have also between 80 and 90% of our cattle, which is produced, or our meat, which is produced over grasslands. So there has been a redistribution. Usually the province of Buenos Aires cattle area is a very productive land, and it has integrated into the last 3 months into feedlots. So what we do is we graze it since it's born, 2 years approximately, till you get a calf, which is only 3 months away. I mean a calf, we call it a novillo, a steer, which is 3 months away of being sent to the slaughterhouse, and it's finished through feedlots. That's probably the way we're working right now. We must take into consideration that Argentina has many, many ups and downs in the economy and in the politics. So it's the producers there are very resilient. This resilience means productivity. We need to be very productive in order to stay alive. So basically, what we do is what I just said, but maybe probably the most important thing is that in order to restore the grasslands, maybe we should go back to having some sort of crop and pasture rotation. Now the no-till rotation is only about crops. You do soya, then you do corn, then you do wheat, and you go again. In the future, maybe if we want to have better land and if we want to be more sustainable in terms of carbon balance and everything, I think we're going to go back into having pastures every couple of years. We have here the Apresid guys. They are the ones of the no-till. They're responsible for our 90%. So, I mean, we need maybe to go back to rotations. This is a challenge because it means that maybe productivity will go down a little bit, and always we can count on the finance. If we have the finance and we manage to align um, the cost opportunity of the farmers with the finance, and we manage to create the incentives, then we'll probably have to have a success in this. I guess you agree with me? This is a small summary from a very complicated and 30, 40 years of production in Argentina. We used to have a lot of alfalfas. We used to have a lot of honey in the alfalfas. Now there's no alfalfas. Everything is crop. It's no-till. The soil is very well conserved through the no-till. But it could be even better if we do rotations. This is an opinion. I mean, I'm not a technician, but this is what I hear, and I think you agree. That's the other thing.
Sorry. We use a lot of cover crops, and we grass also cover crops. This is other deep or upgrade to integrated livestock of beef production with agriculture.
Yeah, yeah. That's another thing we must do. We need to have the crop the whole year round with photosynthesis in there. So the cover crop will do that. So these are the two main, maybe future policies or future strategies that will take us to a more sustainable production in Argentina. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcos. Clap for Marcos. I think you mentioned a word that I've been hearing not only in Argentina but in many panels, the word incentives and
Yeah.
finance. So
Well, yeah.
finance in Argentina also could be a challenge. It's a country where
If
we
you
don't
want, I may add a last comment.
Sure, of course.
From Sociedad Rural, because this is more my own farmer experience, but from Sociedad Rural and with APRESID and with other technical and other associations, we're focusing on measuring each individual farmer in their own land, what is the balance, the carbon balance and the biodiversity and the pollution. We're setting a set of goals and we're trying to certify that in order to be ready for when the carbon incentives are done. We can show them how we do things and what is the path of improvement so that we can align those incentives.
Thank you. Yeah, I think also incentives also is about recognition of all these good practices that the farmers are doing to improving land and to having this ecosystem service to the world. So it's the incentive sometimes not only has to be financial, which also it helps, or through a carbon credit, but also first the recognition on the effort that their farmers are doing to conserving grasslands, forests, or whatever. And sometimes they're just put on the spot for the bad practices, but not all these efforts that they have been doing for many years are not always recognized. So that's something that we always try to put on the table and say they have been giving the world a very important ecosystem service, and that needs recognition. So thank you. And now we are going to our final panelist. We are having Hilen Meirovich. He's the head of climate change of the Inter-American Development Bank, IDB Invest. So I think it's very important to have your presence here today to really bring a different perspective. Just from the investment world, we have hearing a lot the word finance and investment, but also you work with both governments and private sector, and you are a catalyst of this change and this transformation that we are looking for. And we know that you are very linked to the agricultural sector. So can you please explain us a little bit about what's the policy that IDB or AIDB has in terms of investment for climate change and just for also grasslands and restoration?
Super, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me again to another panel to talk about finance. We were here before talking about the whole panel, and I sat in the same chair, and it was all about, we need finance, we need finance, we need finance, and then it was me. So I feel that it's deja vu here. No, but thank you again for inviting me. The other thing that it resonates with me that this conversation about grasslands and biodiversity conservation, it's very much where we were I don't know, 10, 15 years ago in the renewable energy space. Um, I've been going to COPs for a long time. I'm not going to say how long, but when we started, it was about how do we create incentives for solar, wind, etc., to take off. Today, we've seen it. It has taken off. But now we are in this conversation. There are different things that are happening, right? One, we are in the conversation in the agriculture sector coming up to this conversation of climate. But also, the second one is how we are combining the two conventions, the Convention of Biodiversity and the Convention of Climate. These have been always separate, and in this COP, nature and climate is coming together quite a lot, quite strongly. And so you not only talk about carbon credits, but also there's a lot of talk about biodiversity credits. And there are issues about it and how you measure, but there is a lot of interest. There is an interest also from the financial sector that it took a while until they understood they had a role in the climate agenda. I think it's faster now, you know, at that point it was TCFD, which is the Task Force for Climate Financial Disclosure. It was created in 2017. Financial sectors have done it, most of the private sector banks. And recently you're now in the process of the TNFD, which is the Task Force for Nature Financial Disclosure. So this is picking up and it's going faster. As a multilateral development bank, yes, I belong to IDB Invest, which is the private sector arm of the Inter-American Development Bank. We work with private sector, but we have our sibling, the IDB, working with public sectors, working on the NDCs, working on the plans at a government level. And we should not forget, we also have IDB Lab, which is basically an incubator of and a promoter of enterprises that are ecosystem. And we were 2 days ago in a panel about climate tech and how the study that we're doing in climate tech in the Latin American region, interestingly, a large amount of the climate tech, they identified 1,000 climate tech. 60% of that climate tech in Latin America was related to food systems, which I was surprised because I thought most of the things had to do with electromobility or renewable energy, but no, there is a lot going on in the region. It's not surprising in the sense that we are one of the regions, the most diverse, biodiverse regions, and so it makes sense to have a space where we can test technology. So IDB Lab promotes that. IDB will work with governments, and then we come with financial products that support private companies. We either get the pilots and try to support them to grow, or we work with private companies that work with their suppliers to take into account sustainability, biodiversity conservation. And in that sense, we have a target. We have a target of at least 30% of our financing having to be geared to climate finance. And when we get to climate finance and the details, it's really important that many times what we need is sustainable farming, right? And for that, we need a KPI and with data. And when we started conversations with companies about the way they're getting their data, they baseline. So that's why it was really important what you just said about what you're trying to do at the farm level of carbon. The data is not quite accurate. And you can correct me, Senior, if I'm wrong, but we've worked with some companies in Brazil where we had to come back and say, this baseline is not quite right. You're using the wrong proxies. It's not up to date. And so we do that too. We can work with private companies and look at what they have and tell them, you know, if you want to get to an international standard, you should do X, Y, or Z. And many companies will try to engage in that, but of course, they will ask for the incentive, the financial incentive. So in that sense, there are products that have been developed at the market level, at capital markets like green bonds, sustainability-linked bonds, and we can also include and use blended finance, which are resources that we have from our donor countries, that we can use them more creatively, let's say. We can do a guarantee, we can do a mezzanine, we can do a junior tranche, we can even do a performance-based incentive. If you reach a target, we will reduce the cost of that capital. We have beautiful examples of retiring a coal power plant in Chile, where we basically monetize the emissions reductions that they achieved if they closed that coal power plant beforehand, and we provided that as an incentive. So we reduce the cost of capital. We haven't seen yet anything here in grassland in this sector, but we are open to it because we have the resources, we have the intuition and the interest of working with all of you to find that kind of transaction in the future. And probably maybe next COP in Azerbaijan, I hear, we can showcase that.
Thank you. And yeah, as you said, I think everything, we are all putting their eyes on you because when we talk about finance, we think on banks, but there are also different ways of financing, not only through banks or through development banks, but through many other mechanisms that are being discussed here. So now we have some time for questions from the audience. So I don't know if there is any questions that the audience wants to make. If not, I can start. No questions yet? Okay, so I can start. So, what do you think the role that both the public and private sector can play in restoration? Do you think that they have that as a priority? Do you think that they already have activities that are working on, or there is still something that restoration? Do they have enough data at national level on the degraded areas and a special program and focus on which are the actions that need to be taken to avoid more degradation and work on the restoration? Do you think there are already many practices going on, though it's still not a priority issue in your countries? So this is a question that, I don't know, Maria Elena or anyone can.
Yeah, maybe I can go first to break the ice. First, I really want to appreciate what the bank is doing, and it's very innovative. I mean, this is the first time I'm hearing that, and you introduced me as talk about the Americas. So today I'm in the Americas. I'm very happy about that. Yeah, I think I always say this. It's all about the enabling environment. If there's enabling environment, the private sector will come in and support the restoration of the land. Yeah. I talked very briefly about the index-based livestock insurance, for example, and the project that we are calling the DRIVE project. The biggest partner for us, for government, is the private sector, yeah, who are working actually to be, with the pastoralists. So as long as there's an enabling environment, we have an agricultural insurance policy in Kenya, for example. As long as, and you have, like I said, the pastoralism and range management strategy already in place. There are areas that we have already identified in terms of restoration, and the private sector can go there, non-state actors can go there. WWF is actually looking at working in the southern rangeland in Kenya. We also have other companies, one called Wildlife Works that works in the southeastern Kenya. So it all depends. As long as there is enabling environment, good policies, good strategies, and clear direction, yeah? And the fact that if you put these things in the NDC, for example, yeah, that there's room for people to saying, I mean, the government wants to go in this particular direction, then the private investors will always come in. And I'm happy to hear that. And one of the biggest banks in Kenya is actually looking at such a venture, Kenya Commercial Bank. It's one of the banks that I think has been accredited by GCF. So they're looking at bringing on board some of the initiatives that are along what she just said. So it's the enabling environment. If it is there, the private sector will come in, work with the government as long as there are targets, it becomes very clear, and they can work jointly. Yeah, thank you.
I wanted to add that I think there is interest, but there should be much more interest. And I think part of the challenge is that we're still having these conversations in a vacuum or in a siloed approach. And I think it's critical that we look at it from a food systems perspective. And so when we're talking about protecting grassland savannas and doing it through sustainable practices in livestock in this case, we're talking about an entire ecosystem. So we're talking about biodiversity conservation. We're talking about soil health. We're talking about freshwater use, which then allow for more precipitation, livelihoods as well. So I think it's important for all of us in this field to be much more upfront in terms of positioning this as an interrelated system that really has adjacent benefits as we talk about grassland savannas and its conservation. And I think that's critical to rally more partners and financial institutions and others to understand that there is a win-win-win-win when we look at it from that landscape approach and from that more of a systems approach.
Just I also would like to ask about data. I think it's very important. You mentioned already, but just and which are the incentives to get this data? Usually, when we work at GRSB, we are trying to monitor and to verify that the farmers are already doing good practices and to communicate that to the world. But it's very hard for us to get sometimes data from at farm level, either because it's not produced or there's not well kind of put together in one place where everybody can have access to that data. And I imagine from a bank, having access when you make a decision to data is very important. So what do you think are the incentives needed for more data, or which are the challenges maybe from a farmer to get that data? Is that there's more money needed, or is just the farmer that don't use to record all the practices that they do? So is it money? Is it just the mind changing from the farmer? And yeah, because I think with more data, the livestock can be positioned in a different way, because I think the position is because there is not enough data to prove that things are being well done. But yeah, it's a challenge, at least for us as GRSV, to collect that data.
If you want, I can start with that one. When we go and do a certification, it takes a lot of work, a lot of processing, people employed getting that data, collecting it, processing it. It is hard to get a certification. So usually you do it when you're the top tier, then you want it. But then you have the second and the third. Those people are the ones that will follow the first. Usually they do that once you have aligned your incentive, which it should be monetary. So this I mean is the final goal. If you have your data, and your data you can turn back and say, listen, I'm capturing such amounts of carbon per hectare, then, well, everybody will do that. And everybody will try to follow the path of sustainability and improving their land and doing the correct things, because they have data which in the end is transformed into el vil metal, decimos. It's like that. The world moves financially.
Thanks. And a couple of you have mentioned this already, but I think the inclusion of livestock and livestock systems into NDCs would really help in this, because then you would be collecting data and you would be ultimately able to reward farmers for the work they're doing. And there are some examples of that happening already, and it's quite a different system than the one we're talking about at the moment. But in India, milk producers, small-scale farmers, are being rewarded for the biogas that they produce and the manure that is a byproduct of that from the digestate. They earn half as much again from those two products as they do from the milk itself. And so, these things do reward. I'm sure that 5-10 years ago, we would have had a lot of farmers who would have been very much against the idea of including livestock in NDCs. I think today that's turning around.
That's true. Yep. Thank you. Okay, So any closing remarks anyone wants to make? No? If not, I would just give the room to Harko to give final words.
Thank you very much. I think it's quite exciting to see at this COP how many events we have seen on livestock, and also the position that livestock is getting as part of the solution rather than just uh, as the problem on maintaining emission. We recognize that 14.5% of the emissions are from livestock, but we also recognize that there's enormous potential, and we've seen here many examples on solutions and how to raise the ambitions. I think I hope you go back with some numbers in your head. Like we heard that 40 to 50% of the terrestrial land is covered by grasslands, and that 50%, twice as much carbon is stored in grasslands than in forest. But also recognize that only less than 10%, in some countries less than 2%, is protected, while in forest we see that increasingly growing up to 30% and higher if you consider also indigenous lands. So I think today is the Nature Day, so also together with forests, grasslands need more recognitions. And that's also, we hope that in the International Year of Grasslands and Savannas, we will really put that on the map. I think it's great to see indeed some of the solutions. I think, nature-based solutions is, and also the toolkit. It's a great tool to really incorporate livestock in the NDCs. Now we have the tool, so I hope next year countries will use that tool, and we will see that countries that have grasslands will upgrade the ambitions, like we see Kenya have doing, from in the thousands of hectares to in the 1.2 million hectares in just 5 years, and which is amazing. And also we seeing that perhaps in each country the solutions are different, but it's about listening to the farmer, listening to the incentives, the right incentives for the right solutions. So the solutions that work in Kenya are not the same that they work in Argentina, but we need to really come with specific pathways for that, and I think research can help us, data can help us to achieve that. Finance is the big thing. We know food systems contributes to 30% of greenhouse gas emissions. We know how important it is today, and this COP is really about food systems. Livestock is important, but we see that only 4% of finance goes to agriculture, and what was it? 0.6% goes to livestock. So we really have to step up, and that, so not just through climate finance, but also through private sector investment. So I think you will be invited more times to discuss how we're going to do that, because there are tools that were mentioned here that are very interesting to de-risk that. I think blended finance, developing specific product for livestock, insurance. I think insurance is very important to de-risk the farmers. It's 2,000 per hectare is something, if you don't, not every farmer can take that risk. So insurance could not just help us to de-risk, but I think also to improve the quality of the data, improve the quality of those projects, and we certainly will need to look further into that. And what I wanted to add to this long list is the fact that 600 million smallholder farmers depend on animal food systems. That's also very important to consider. It's not a mitigation, but it's also an adaptation strategy. 1.2 million jobs depend on livestock and pastoralism systems. So we are talking also a large amount of people that are, and if I consider also vulnerable people, like in the Asal region in the sub-Saharan Africa. They are sometimes 100% dependent on nomadic and pastoral systems. So it is important to consider also those social elements as well. And that's why I also invite you to visit the website of Solutions with Legs. A name you will hope you remember. Just Google it up. Today we are bringing livestock as part of the solution for adaptation and mitigation. So please check that website and also sign the call to action on indeed more attention to livestock sector and also using climate finance to support these calls. Thank you very much, and I hope we will put livestock and grasslands on the negotiation of the COP.
Thank you very much.